This is my new Model 3 Performance, and before buying it, I'd heard a lot about impressive technology in this car, but now after about 8 months of ownership and 8,000 miles, what do I really think about the technology in the new Model 3 Performance? Well, I'm John with Blackbird Productions, and in this video, I'll share my thoughts about technology features in this new Model 3 Performance. I'll give you my wish list for technology that I'd like to see in future Tesla models. And at the end of this video, I'll give you some insight into my personal thoughts around technology and EVs overall. So if you're new to the channel, welcome. I create videos like this every week, documenting my Tesla ownership experience. I also create other cool and exciting content around cars as well. So after you're finished watching this video, check out my other content. And if you love cars as much as I do, consider subscribing. Also, don't forget to leave a like on this video since it helps other folks who are interested in the new Tesla find this video. Thank you in advance. So, favorite tech features. I have a list over on the side here. So you have to pardon me if I just look over to the side periodically. But first thing is the fact that you can actually adjust the steering weight on the steering wheel in this car. I'm not sure if that's true for any other Tesla model, but for this car, you can change the weight and there's 3 settings. You could actually choose light, standard, and heavy. I'm looking at it right here just to make sure I have those 3 right. So far, my personal favorite is heavy, just because it doesn't feel as, I guess, artificial as the other 2, if that makes sense. It's something you have to experience when you're driving this car because this is a pretty heavy car. And when you change the steering weight to light, it is lighter, yes, but the car is still heavy. So it's kind of like the steering weight itself is fighting against the sheer weight of this car. I know that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but it's just something you just have to experience. But I was actually playing around with the steering weight last night, and for the first time, I actually moved it over to heavy, and it's just like day and night difference. If you go from light to heavy, it feels like a lot more precise and it's balanced. That's like the main thing when you're driving a performance car. You want to be able to go through these turns and stuff as you're doing your spirited driving as accurately as possible. So having a heavy steering wheel with more precise steering helps with that. The second thing is you could actually stream movies, TV shows, games, anything you want pretty much is accessible through this screen. And that, I mean, I don't really use it as much, but it does come in handy when you're just sitting at a supercharger and waiting for your car to be charged. Not to mention, one thing I actually didn't know is some superchargers, they actually come with their own Wi-Fi, because I actually parked in front of one and it was just public Wi-Fi available, and that is pretty cool. But usually when I'm using the streaming system, I'm usually just looking at YouTube, and the interface is simple enough to where for the most part, you don't really even have to think about what to do. It's actually a much more stripped down interface than what you get with, for example, the desktop version of YouTube. Now, I haven't tried Twitch or any of those other apps, and I don't have Netflix currently, so I haven't had the opportunity to try those apps yet. But my theory is that those actually follow sort of the same UI formula, which I think is pretty cool. In terms of the games, I don't really play the games in this car. I want to say once upon a time, this car actually had some Steam integration, so you could actually play Call of Duty while you're just charging your car. I don't know if they have that. Well, I know for sure they don't have that anymore, but that would be on my wish list, which I'm going to get into later on in this video. Next thing is the dynamic dampening system in this car. It is another day and night feature that I find very interesting. When I'm doing my spirited driving, you definitely can feel it. It's much more bouncier than just the standard suspension, but it's still pretty smooth to a degree. I think just going back to what I was saying, just having that feel, that sporty feel, it's a fun feeling to have a car that you can just toss around corners and actually feel those bumps and things like that. The last thing I have on my list here is around the maps system in this car. And before I get into that, I obviously have a lot of other things that I like about this car, but I just wanted to keep this list down to just 5 things, just so that way I can just streamline this video a little bit better and also not, go on too many tangents. But in terms of the map system in this car, it's rock solid. A lot of people don't know this, but they're actually using a Google backend to pull maps from. So my theory is that they're using Google's API to retrieve map data. And the map data is being fed through a custom front end that Tesla made themselves, which is a very, very minimal front end, but also gives you all of the basics that you need for a map system, like finding superchargers, finding restaurants and points of interest and stuff like that. And it takes up pretty much the entire screen. So it's very clear, you could see it. And also with this newest update, it actually shows traffic patterns as well. Whereas in the past, you had to actually opt in for premium connectivity to get that, which is also another point I have. Contrary to common belief, at least from my belief before I got this car, you actually don't need an external internet connection to access the maps in this car. It uses its standard connectivity system to pull that data from whatever Google API it's coming from. So I think that's pretty cool. Now, based on some of the terms and conditions around just connectivity in general, I remember reading somewhere that it only lasts for like 10 years or something like that, and then you have to pay for standard connectivity. But I mean, let's be honest, I don't think anyone's gonna be owning this car for more than 5 years, which is another thing I'm going to talk about later on in this video. So my wish list. So my wish list for technology to include in future Tesla models include number 1, a modular upgraded center screen unit. I think the idea of having just a screen to control everything is very, very interesting. And it's also very appealing to a lot of people, including myself. Just being someone that just interacts with different screens throughout my day. Like I have my iPad, I've got my laptop, I've got my main computer, I've got my phone. So I'm buried in screens pretty much all day. So you could say the novelty of having a large screen that controls everything in the car is not only easy to operate, at least for me, but it's something you could say that I've become accustomed to over time. But these cars don't last forever. And since the screen seems to be the central processing unit for everything in this car, I'm sure there's a box somewhere or some sort of computer underneath the car just controlling everything. But having upgradable components like the screen would be a nice feature to have. And also, I think the ability to just take the screen off and just interact with it, or have like a passenger interact with it to get just a closer look, would be pretty cool. Or if you have kids in the back, let's just say you don't have like an iPad or something, and the car is in cruise control or the car is driving itself. I think it would be cool if you could actually take the screen off and just hand it back to one of the kids and they can just play their games or watch YouTube or something, while you have just like minimal controls in the front where you could obviously control the speed of the autopilot and stuff like that. I think that would be pretty interesting. Next thing about the screen is having the ability to rotate the screen and also have a haptic feedback motor for touch sensitivity. So I'll talk about the first one. So you could say this is a 2-part feature. First one is the rotatable screen. A lot of automakers are doing this, including Polestar. They actually have a portrait screen in all of their cars. And I think that's the more accessible way of interacting with the car if you're just going to go all screen. Just because what I'm finding is, especially when I'm driving, I have to reach all the way across the screen to interact with basic controls. And I know they've kind of improved this by like putting the core controls on the side where you could easily access it. But like, for example, if I want to open the glove box while I'm driving just to get out some paperwork or something, I have to reach all the way across the screen to do that. Likewise, for just all of the basic controls like the lights, child lock, all those basic controls I have to reach over, which probably to you just looking at the video, that may not be like that big of an issue. But when you're driving, you have to actually look down from the road and look and see where you're actually tapping, because you don't want to tap the wrong thing. Obviously, you don't want to tap the windshield wiper and the windshield wiper just starts going. The other thing is haptic feedback. I think that would be a huge accessibility benefit. And I think every screen and every car should have this, because it will essentially bring back that tactile feedback that we're all used to with just the ICE cars with all the buttons and things like that. And I think something like that would be pretty cool. I know for me, it would just build my confidence enough to actually press something while I'm driving without actually looking at the screen. So that way I know I'm actually pressing something and I don't have to look down from the road onto the screen to do that. My next wish list item is around buttons. And I know buttons are a bit controversial, especially with a car like this and many other EVs, it seems, because they just seem to be moving away from buttons in general, which I feel like there's definitely people that enjoy that and there is a market for that. However, I feel like this interior is just a little bit too minimal. Sorry about this, but there's actually a guy in front of me with a truck. He just turned it on and he just walked away. So if you could hear his truck, I apologize. But in terms of buttons, I definitely would like to see more buttons in this car, maybe more capacitive buttons, which dare I say that because a lot of people don't really like the capacitive buttons, but I haven't had any issues with them and I think they're pretty solid for this car. And speaking of which, just going back to what I was saying around the self-driving stuff and just having the ability to just take the screen off and just hand it to someone, I think having just like quick little self-driving controls would be pretty nice. The last thing on my wish list is having the ability to open the software up and add aftermarket modifications. So this could be in the form of tuning or third-party applications. So for the tech inclined out there, I am a tried and true Linux user and I like open software. I like the ability to manipulate and just customize the software the way I want. And Tesla's software is pretty closed source. They button this thing up pretty tight for obvious reasons. They don't want people pirating their premium connectivity or any of their other future or current services attached to this car, which that's fine. I just want the ability to add third-party apps that aren't available yet on this car. And also add my own tuning profile, similar to ICE cars, how you can just go to the dyno and then they give you the results and then you can just tune the car based on your driving style or whatever you want in terms of how the car performs. I think having the ability to do that would be actually pretty nice. All right. So the last thing I want to talk about is planned obsolescence. I feel like although modern technology in cars is pretty much at its peak, or it's at an all-time high in terms of production, I feel that losing a lot of that tactile feel that you get with cars in general and gaining all these technological advancements in the form of software isn't a reliable way of owning a car, especially if you want to own that car long-term. Because I know people that have owned, for example, just ICE cars that they've passed down to their kids. And I feel with a car like this, you can't do that just because the technology is advancing so fast that the average consumer can't keep up with it. To me, these are like smartphones. And as you know, with every smartphone iteration that comes out every year, they try to market it in a way to get you to buy it, which goes back to my point of people who buy this car, they probably won't be owning it for more than 5 years, just because the technology is getting better and better with every iteration of the car. And I feel like as it gets better, people will be more incentivized to upgrade to the latest and greatest thing, given if they have the money. And I feel like that's just something we don't need right now. I think we need cars that last a long time. And obviously, I mean, if you're a company looking at this, you could probably say, well, like, how are you supposed to do that while actually making a profit on the car? I don't make cars for a living, so I don't know how to answer that question. But I know in the past, automakers just made quality cars, without plastic, without all these, extra features and stuff. A lot of the stuff actually came in the form of just simple things, just quality leather, quality materials, and a very desirable package in terms of just how a car looks and feels and drives on the road. And obviously those cars sold, and they're still being sold in circulation today. Whereas with something like this car, I feel like in 20, 30 years, no one will want it, or it will be obsolete because the battery will inevitably just die on you or degrade over time, which you could argue and say like, well, technology in the battery sector is actually going to be much more advanced 30 years from now. And that might be true, but that isn't true of just the overall technology in the car, because reality is, a lot of these companies like Tesla, they can obviously issue a software update over the air and give you some of those features. But I feel like they do it very sparingly and they do it based on what the car is equipped with in terms of just internal modules, cameras, and stuff like that. So there are limitations when it comes to those kind of things. But anyway, those are my personal thoughts. You can let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are just about planned obsolescence and if it's a theory or not, because people, believe it or not, they actually don't believe that. There's also people that think that the government will actually control EVs in the future, which I don't know. I feel like that's not too far off in terms of what a company can and can't do, especially if they're at a government level. So that's something to think about. So if you enjoyed my insights just about technology in this car overall, let me know in the comments, and also leave a like on the video. That will tell me if I should make more videos like this. Also, while you're down there, consider subscribing. Like I said in the beginning, I make videos like these every week, and I also make car reviews every month. I also started to dabble in commentary just around topics that I find interesting in the car community. And my latest video, I actually talk about some of the most exciting EVs coming in 2025. So chances are, if you like this video, you'll definitely enjoy that one. And you can view that in a card somewhere along here or maybe here. The camera's like flipped and it's upside down, so it's hard for me to like distinguish where the direction is, but you'll find it. Anyway, this has been John with Blackbird Productions. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.